Take 2.
Philosophy, critical thinking, reason. Great philosophers brought great change, but at what cost? Hello, Husna here, and today we have a lot to unpack. The darkness of enlightenment. I don't want to refer to certain philosophers or ideas of that era. Instead, we'll take a closer look on how the teachings of enlightenment are linked to the creation of a Eurocentric world. I chose this topic because of a liberating experience I had. No, wasn't taking off my hijab. As you can see, I still have a scarf on my head. So much so, it was reading this book. A Culture of Ambiguity, an Alternative History of Islam by Thomas Bauer. Thomas Bauer is a professor for Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Münster. And in regards of deconstructing Western worldviews, I'd say this is as important as Edward Said's Orientalism, at least for me, especially in regards of deconstructing the teachings of enlightenment. This is a German copy, by the way. Again, another topic, another definition. First of all, we have to discuss what this term even means. It can mean various things in different contexts, yet the general understanding of this term is to a certain era in history. To be precise, the 18th century. To be more precise, the 18th century in Europe. Starting in France with thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, Montesquieu, many philosophers all over Europe collaborated on the idea of the Enlightenment. Thus, a movement began and Europe changed forever. The critical thinking of new philosophical ideologies such as empiricism or rationalism shifted Europe from a faith and religion-oriented world to a world that centered around reason and the evidence of senses. If you hadn't slept in your philosophy classes, of course no one does that. I mean, it's philosophy. You probably already heard names like John Locke, René Descartes, Francis Bacon, or Immanuel Kant, who are all very influential thinkers of that era. All of their works had a huge impact on the liberation from strict and oppressive dogmas. Kant defines it as follows. Enlightenment is man's release from his self-incurred tutelage. Tutelage is man's inability to make use of his understanding without direction from another. Self-incurred is this tutelage when its cause lies not in lack of reason, but in lack of resolution and courage to use it without direction from another. Sapere aude, have courage to use your own reason. That is the motto of enlightenment. Immanuel Kant, an answer to the question, what is enlightenment? An essay. By the end of the century, ideals of scientific progress, liberty, and equality led to significant events, one of them being the French Revolution in 1789. For better or worse, the impact of enlightenment is still vivid in our world. One of my favorite depictions of the spirit of enlightenment in modern times is The Dialectic of Enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer.
Hey, look, before you even start, I'm not denying evolution, okay? I'm just saying that it's one of the possibilities.
It's the only possibility, Phoebe.
Okay, Ross, could you just open your mind like this much? Okay? Now, wasn't there a time when the brightest minds in the world believed that the Earth was flat? And up until, 50 years ago, you all thought the atom was the smallest thing until you split it open and this, whole mess of crap came out. Now, are you telling me that you are so unbelievably arrogant that you can't admit that there's a teeny tiny possibility that you could be wrong about this?
All jokes aside, this exact arrogance is what was caused by the Enlightenment. In Theodor Adorno's and Max Horkheimer's critique on the Enlightenment, the consequences are even worse. The shift from a mythological and religious world to a completely rational world did exactly fall into its own trap. While its founding fathers advocated detachment from dogmas, the rationality itself became such. That's why the Enlightenment era has not caused only a simple arrogance. In the zeitgeist of World War II, the philosophers state that it's an absolute totalitarian way of thinking that gave all the dictator regimes in Central Europe reason to oppress everyone who didn't fit the image, the rational image, because reason and ratio always claims only one truth. So this is a very, very short summary of what the critic is about, but it's enough to understand something else better. Eurocentrism. When I say literature, which authors do you think of? Or when you think of a philosopher, which image do you have in mind? These are the results you get from Google. I don't like to sound pretentious, but I have a point to make. So, as someone who enjoys international cinema and literature a lot, I can say that those pictures pop up for a reason. The influence of many Western artists, thinkers, or academics can be seen anywhere you look. Is it simply because they are better than everyone and the rest of the world only has to follow up? As obviously wrong as this sounds, this is exactly what you get from Western media outlets and education. I grew up in Germany, I know what I'm talking of. Those systems made really many immigrants and children of immigrants believe that they are inferior to Western standards. All those media outlets and education systems are built upon supremacist ideologies. Thus, Eurocentrism. In an article called Eurocentrism and Social Science, the term is categorized as a variation of ethnocentrism, which again, according to the Penguin Dictionary of Anthropology, refers to the tendency to view one's own ethnic group and its social standards as the basis of judgments concerning the practices of others, with the implication that one views one's own standards as superior. Based on the research in the fields of economics, psychology, and social anthropology, the same article states that Western colonial history is the cause of European dominance in science, economy, and power over the last decade. This is exactly what I meant with you can see the influence everywhere you look. Further, it points the after effects of the practiced Eurocentrism. First, we have non-European societies are damaged through the colonization of their intellectuals. Secondly, it has empowered the academic disciplines themselves, which remain unaware of an alternative source of knowledge outside mainstream development. And lastly, it functions, regardless of intention, to legitimate international systems of inequality. At this point, I want to make the connection between Eurocentrism and the Enlightenment clear. Eurocentrism existed since the dawn of time. Yet, Eurocentrism after the 18th century is different from before, with the difference that now the one-way rationalized way of thinking is used as the legitimation. Since the Enlightenment declared reason to be the measure of all things, everything that isn't accessible to the European reason fell into disorder. In the end, human ratio itself became nothing but a weapon. Here, I want to quote Adorno and Horkheimer again. The surface of an advancing rationalization of instrumental thought, modeled on the domination of nature and serving its purposes, the enlightened reason is progressively hollowed out until it reverts to the new mythology of a resurrected relationship to nature, to violence. This is the point where reason itself became a weapon. The reason why I love this book so much is because the majority of Europe still believes in the excellence of enlightenment. So did I. School taught me critical thinking, and school is bound to the brilliance of its philosophical traditions. It was only after reading this book I realized that the critical thinking that has been passed over me was only into one direction, to the direction of rationality that brings an undeniable truth, which of course is nothing but a mythology itself. The wonderful subtitle, An Alternative History of Islam, already lets us know what we can expect. The alternative in the title does not only offer a different reading of the history of Islam, but also an opposite view to the rational European standpoint, which is acknowledging the beauty of ambiguity. You all are probably already familiar with the meaning of ambiguity in regards to language. Bauer shows how culture can also function in an ambiguous way, or better to say, how it already functioned that way for hundreds of years until Europeans forced the superiority of rational thinking onto them. Before we go on with that, we have a last but the most important definition for today. Of course, the definition of cultural ambiguity. We may talk on the phenomenon of cultural ambiguity if, over a period of time, two contrary or at last competing, clearly differing meanings are associated with one of the same term, act, or object, or if a social group draws on contrary or strongly differing discourses for attributions of meaning to various realms of human life, or if one group simultaneously accepts different interpretations of a phenomenon, all of them entitled to equal validity. Based on this understanding, chapter after chapter, he explains how the concept was practiced among Muslim societies. It's an understanding that our tradition is built upon, as well as various non-Muslim traditions from Muslim-dominated territories practice. Now we have to clear a big contradiction the average Westerner may not comprehend. We speak of Islam, a very systematic religion, a monotheistic religion. So, since God in monotheistic religions is an absolute being, there is only one truth. There is only one absolute truth. How can ambiguity lead to that absolute truth? Post-enlightenment faith also tracks this truth back to rationality. For example, when you look at Descartes, and at this point I will say calculations, when you look at its calculations, you'll see that his belief also can be tracked back to rationality. He finds to a higher being through clearness and distinctness. What is an alternative way to find God? As Bauer quotes Ibn al-Jaziri, a Muslim scholar, it's not a matter of recognizing something as true quite clearly and distinctly, but a matter of whether, despite all this difference and diversity, something can be interpreted as true without irresolvable contradictions. Thus, only diversity and ambiguity allow for consistency as a criterion of truth. And exactly this is the mercy of God. God is absolute. There is an absolute truth to that belief. Yet, he does not expect his whole creation to find their faith in only one way. There is only one truth, but various paths that can lead to that truth. On another note, the acceptance of various understandings in our world also creates a life filled with tolerance, progress, and liberties. When Muslims do have such a developed understanding of diversity, why do they hate each other and the rest of the world today? Exactly this was what stood out to me the most in this reading. It says that the cause of hyperliberal Islam, which is spread in the West, and radical Islam we see daily in our news, are the same. Because liberal Muslims and radical Muslims are those who lack the competence to live the harmony of modern standards and traditional values. Within the culture of ambiguity, Muslims never had problems with living the dichotomy of daily non-religious activities and religious practices. The West taught Muslims that the secular life and the religious life can't be united, which divided them into two extreme directions. Of course, there is a lot more to everything I just mentioned. And I don't want to declare rationality as an ultimate enemy. On the contrary, I want to create a shift in thinking that includes enough space for diversity and plurality. Indeed, history shows us again and again that ideas bring conflict. But we have to keep in mind that not the ideas are the problem, but the claim to make those ideas the absolute truth. Whatever you base all your knowledge, values, or beliefs on. Make sure that your counterpart can always be as right as you, even if your whole view is based on logic.